Now, the last feature I want to cover here before we dive into the demo project is redirects, a feature that allows us to redirect the user. And I got an example for this as well. In our app.js file, we define routes for /welcome, /products, and /products product ID. Now, what if I just visit my domain /nothing? Then I don't get an error, but I also don't see anything on the screen. Now here, we might want to redirect the user to /welcome. Of course, we could also just change this to /nothing exact here and show the welcome page for /nothing, but if that's not what we want, we can redirect instead. For this, we can define another route where the path is /nothing and where we add exact so that this is not treated as the start of a route. Otherwise, it would match all routes because all routes start with /nothing in the end. Hence, we need exact here. And then inside of this route, I don't render JSX code. I don't render another custom component. Instead, we render a component provided by React Router DOM, the redirect component. That is a component which you can render like this, and if it gets rendered, it will do what the name implies. It redirects the user somewhere else. So here we can then redirect to /welcome, which means if we're just visiting /nothing, this will be rendered, and this will then change the URL to /welcome, and then this route will become active. Hence, exact is very important here, because without it, every route would be matched here, and we would be redirecting all the time, and we would create an infinite loop therefore. So exact matters. But with that, if we save this, if I visit just my domain /nothing, you see it automatically changes to /welcome in the URL here. And that's how we can use redirects in our application with help of this redirect component provided by React Router. Whenever you learn something new, it is important to practice it, and therefore that's what we're going to do now over the next lectures. We're also going to dive into more React Router features. So the rest of this module is not just practicing, but we're going to start with practicing what we learned because it is super important that you do understand React Router and how you can use it. Now attached you find a brand new starting project. This project here. You can simply download it, extract it, run npm install and npm start. There you got some starting components, which we'll use over the next lectures, and you got an empty app.js file. I did already add React Router to the starting project package.json file, so when you ran npm install, you did already install React Router DOM. You don't need to install it separately. You would, of course, need to install it if you work on a project that doesn't use React Router yet. Now with that, we're ready to dive in, and we're going to build this demo application here. An application where we can view some quotes, dive into specific quotes, and add new quotes. For the moment, all without a backend server, just locally in our client-side application. The quotes which we add also won't actually be added to our list of quotes because we will not use context or Redux or a backend for the moment. That is something which we'll add in a second step thereafter. So let's get started. And let's get started by defining the main routes we need in this application here. Now in the last lecture, I showed you the kind of pages I want to have in this example application. And there we had a page which shows all quotes. Then we had a quote detail page. When we click on a single quote, we would go to that page. And we had that page for adding a brand new quote. So we got 3 different pages, 3 different routes which we want to register. Now, you will get more out of this course and out of this section specifically if you also try these things on your own, if you practice on your own. And therefore, before we add those pages together and before we then add all the code for registering those pages as routes, try this on your own. Add a couple of page components and then write all the routing code to register these page components as different routes for different paths. The paths are up to you, and make sure that you can navigate between those pages by entering these paths manually in the URL. So you can add links right now, but you don't have to, but definitely make sure that you add all those page components and you register them. And then, after a short pause, which I give you to pause the video and try it on your own, we're going to do that together. So, were you successful? Let's try this together. And therefore here, in this app component function, we can import route, this special route component, from React Router DOM. Because you learned that this is the component we use for defining routes. Now I also want to import switch right away, the switch component, because I know that I want to have only one active route at the same time. And then here in this app component, instead of this div, we can return switch, and inside of switch define our different routes. Now every route then needs a path for which it becomes active. That's what you learned. And if we have a route that should render a list of quotes, that path could be /quotes. And then here we want to output the quotes component, which we have yet to add. Then I'll add another route here with a path of, let's say, /quotes /quote ID to render the detail page for a quote. Here we have a dynamic route, a dynamic path segment. That's another key feature we learned about, so that we can load the same component for different quotes, and we encode the quote identifier in the URL so that we can get it inside of the loaded component. Now we also have to add a component here, which we render. We don't have one yet, but before I add it, I will add my last and third route here. And that is a route that allows us to add a new quote. So the path here could be new-quote. Now, of course, all these paths are up to you. It's your page, and it simply depends on how you want your URLs to look like. Now we have these 3 routes. Now we need 3 page components. And I do have this empty pages folder here already. You can add such a folder as well if you don't have it. And in that folder, I want to create these special React components which are responsible for rendering the different pieces of data. So in this pages folder, I'll add a new file, and that could be named allquotes.js. The file name is of course up to you. This will then hold my component which displays all the quotes. We can also add a single quote or quote detail.js file, which will be used for that detail page, and a new quote.js file, which will hold the form for adding a new quote. Now for the moment, I'll just add basic component functions in there. So in the allquotes.js file, I'll add this component function here, copy that and add it to new quote as well, and then also add it here to quote detail and just change the name. Now we got these 3 component functions, and in the all quotes page, we could return a h1 tag where we say all quotes page, and then copy this into new quote and say new quote page here, and copy it one more time into quote detail, and hence say quote detail page here. And now in app.js, we can use these 3 components just as we learned it a couple of minutes ago. We can import all quotes from /pages all quotes, We can import quote detail from /pages quote detail. And we can import new quote from /pages new quote. And then use these free components down here. Here we have the all quotes component. Here we have the quote detail component. And here we have the new quote component. And with that, we finished the definition of our routes. Now there's one thing missing though, and do you remember what it is? Well, to use React Router, it's not enough to just define those routes, you also need to activate the router. And you do that by wrapping your root component, the app component, in the index.js file with this special browser router component. So for this, we can import browser router from React Router DOM, and then wrap the app component with this special browser router component. Just like this. Now we activate the browser router, and now if we save this, if I reload my page, on localhost 3000 I see nothing, but if I enter /quotes here, I see my all quotes page. If I enter /quotes/q1, I also see the all quotes page. And what could be causing this? Why am I not seeing the quote detail page here? Well, because you have to remember how React Router matches your routes. I mentioned that it goes through your routes top to bottom, and thanks to switch, it will then stop as soon as it has a match. Now, when it comes to matching, React Router by default looks at the beginning, at the start of the path, and it matches this here with the start of the actual URL path. So if you are on /quotes/q1, /quotes is definitely part of that path. This path starts with /quotes. So therefore here, to avoid this and to make sure that this route actually becomes active, this second route, we can add this exact prop here. Or we change the order. That would be an alternative. Here I'll work with the exact prop. Were you successful? Let's do it together. And let's start with redirecting. I want to redirect from /nothing to /quotes. And for that, in my root route definition, in this root component, inside of this switch block here, I'll add another route. And here the path will just be /nothing. We should also add the exact prop here so that we don't look at the beginning of the path, but we only match full paths. And then here, I don't want to render a custom component, but instead will render a component provided by React Router. And that's the redirect component. Whenever this component gets rendered, the browser redirects, so it loads a different URL, a different path. And here, inside of this first route, I now do want to redirect, and we do set the to prop here to tell React Router where to redirect. And I want to redirect to /quotes here, so that if we visit our domain /nothing, we redirect to our domain /quotes. And with this, if we enter localhost 3000 like this, it automatically changes to /quotes. Now the other task I gave you was to extract this quote ID on this quote detail page. And we also learned how that works. Inside of that loaded component, we can use a special hook provided by React Router DOM. We can use the use params hook, which we import from React Router DOM, and then we can call use params in this functional component and get access to the params. And now that we got access, we can output the params, of course. We could, for example, add a fragment or a section or a div here. Of course, if you do go for a fragment, as I do here, you need to import it from React. And then here below that, we could have a paragraph where we simply output params.quoteID. Now it's .quoteID here because I gave my identifier a name of quote ID here after the colon. Whatever you chose here, that's the key which you then can access on this params object in your component. And with this, if we save that, and I enter slash quotes slash first dash quote, for example, I see first quote down here. So this is now also working, and with that we applied almost all the things I wanted to apply. One thing is missing though, and that's a nested route, which I want to add. We currently don't have any real data which we use. We'll do that later. But I already want to simulate that on the quote detail page, we might have comments for that quote, so that users can leave comments for a quote. Hence, below that paragraph, I want to render this comments component. Now for this, we could of course embed it just as we always do. But now here's the interesting thing. I want to use a nested route for this, so that if we just visit slash quotes slash some ID, we don't see the comments. Only if we visit slash quotes slash some ID, like first quote in this case, slash comments. Only if we have slash comments at the end, only then that comments component should be loaded below this paragraph. And that's therefore your task. Render the comments by using a nested route. We'll do it together in the next lecture. So let's now add this comments section together. And again, let's make sure that it only shows up if we are on slash quotes slash some ID slash comments. Now for this, we can render a nested route here, which means we can import that route component from React Router DOM. And then below the paragraph, we can add this route component. We then give it a path. For example, the path here could be slash quotes slash some ID slash comments. And here we'll have a problem. Some ID, of course, is not always the same ID. It's dynamic. This quote detail page will be loaded for different IDs. But we do get the ID here. So we can actually construct a dynamic path here. And that is something we haven't done up to this point. But since this is a regular React component with a regular prop, you can of course also pass in dynamic values and not just hard-coded paths. So here we can pass a dynamic value as a path, and for example create a template literal, which is slash quotes slash. Then we inject params.quoteID, and then we add slash comments. So now this route path is constructed dynamically, and it depends on the quote ID for which this quote detail component was loaded. And that is absolutely something you can build, that you register a route where the path for which it loads a component is dynamic. That's not something we did thus far, but since this is a regular React component, it is something we can do, and we're doing it here. So now here, between the opening and closing route tags, we can again define which component should be loaded. And for that, I did prepare this comments component in advance here, and it's this component which should be loaded now. So I import comments from going up one level, diving into components, comments, and then this comments component here. And simply add comments here like this. If I now save this, if I visit slash quotes slash first quote slash comments, I do see this comments block here with this add a comment button, which then opens this super big form. The styling is not final yet. We'll continue working on that, but we see that it works. If I just visit slash quotes slash first quote without slash comments, we don't see that comments block. So this nested route is working in the way it should. Now we practiced those core basics again. One very basic feature is missing though, and that would be links. At the moment, we can only navigate around by manually changing the URL. Now I want to add some navigation, and whilst you can definitely also do this on your own, I would recommend that we do it together because I want to build a brand new component with a specific styling, and hence that will be easier if we do it together here. But definitely feel free to also pause here and build your own basic dummy navigation, which allows you to switch between the quotes and new quote page. We'll work on getting to the quote ID page a little bit later. Now to build it together though, I'll dive into that layout folder, and here I prepared two CSS files for two components which we'll add together. The first component will be the main navigation component, which I'll store in a main navigation.js file. As the name suggests, the job of this component will be to render a main navigation bar. So in here, I'll add a regular component, main navigation, a component function, as we did it many times before in this course. And then here in this component, I want to return a header. And in that header, I want to have a div which holds my logo text, which could be great quotes or anything like this. And next to that div, I'll add a nav element, which will then store an unordered list with a couple of list items, where every list item should hold a link. Now we'll need some styling here, and therefore I'll import classes from /main navigation.module.css. So from that CSS file, which I already provided to you. And then on that header, you should add a class name of classes.header. On that div, you can add a class name of classes.logo. And these are all predefined CSS classes, which you find in this CSS file, which I provided to you. And on the nav element, it's classes.nav. Now for these list items, as I just mentioned, I want to have links in there. And you did learn that having an anchor tag is not optimal, at least not if you add it like this, because that would then trigger the browser default of sending a new request, and we don't want that. Instead, we learned that React Router gives us specific components, which we can use for rendering links. And there we have the link component for a standard link, and the nav link component for a standard link, which also gets a specific CSS class if it's active. And here I'll use that nav link. And then in this first list item, we can add a nav link with a text of all quotes between the nav link components, which leads to /quotes, for example. And I'll also set the active class name prop here to classes.active so that this link gets the active CSS class if it is active. And of course, that is a class which I use in this CSS file. Now I'll repeat this entire list item and add a second list item where we could say add a quote, and this then leads to /new quote. And with that, we should have the finished main navigation. Now we could add this main navigation here in the app.js file above the switch statement, but I will actually also add another component, the layout component, which I'll store in a layout.js file in that layout folder. This will be a very simple component. I'll again create it as a functional component and export it like this. And here I'll also import classes from /layout.module CSS file using that existing CSS file which you find here. Now the goal of this component is to render the main navigation side by side with the actual page content. And for this, I'll return a fragment, since I want to have adjacent JSX elements. Fragment is imported from React, of course. And then here we can render the main navigation. And for that, make sure that you import main navigation, this main navigation component we just worked on, from that main navigation file. And side by side to it, I'll add a main element, which gets a class of classes.main. And here I then want to render the actual page content. Now, of course, the actual page content is determined in the app.js file by these routes though. But we also learned in this course what we can do in this case. I want to use layout as a wrapper around this switch statement here in the end, so that whatever route is chosen and rendered, it's wrapped by the layout. And we can create such wrapper components by using props, and to be precise, props children. And then we can go to app.js and import layout from ./components/layout/layout, and then simply wrap layout around this switch statement here. And if we do all of that and you save all files, you should now have this navigation. And you see that the active link is highlighted. It's a bit whiter than the inactive link. So we can switch and that highlighting changes. And now if I go to quotes/some ID, we also have the quote detail page here. And if I then add /comments, we also have that here. And now the form isn't as big anymore. Now that's still all not working, and that's of course not the final page, but it's one step closer.